this is a classic formula. The idea of the story contents were unique to comics because they dealt with human experience, with the human condition, or the human comedy, if you will. But they were fundamental stories. They dealt with fundamental human interaction, human problems, and that's what gave it endurance.
Tem histórias, acho que antológicas. Tem uma onde ele falava da bomba atômica e do planeta que explodia. Outro é uma história antológica dele, em que toda a história era focada, era vista pelos olhos de um personagem. E assim vai. Ele me ensinou coisas mil, realmente. Me ensinou principalmente que nada precisa ser igual.
He was wonderfully imaginative in his opening sequence, which really drew you into the story, set the mood, and you can almost smell and hear the elements in the story. And he did wonderful things with the logo. It almost became a trademark, where he incorporated the logo into the theme of the story, very imaginatively. And that was very influential. Will recreated the kind of grit and the noise and the dirt of urban society and urban decay.
Essa questão do Eisner fazer a abertura das páginas com essas letras, essa coisa toda que sempre dá o clima da história que você vai ler. E isso aí muda, porque antes o que era o título da história? Era só fulano de tal em tal história. E de repente não, você mostra onde a coisa está acontecendo, né? Então é muito característico do trabalho dele. E muita gente, com certeza, incorporou isso também nos seus trabalhos.
What I really remember was the sense of personality that came through. And mostly that was through all of the wonderful spirit title pages, the splash pages, where he would set the world that you were in. You know, he would go to the next level in terms of where the spirit, the name would appear and how it would appear. Would it be a building this time? Would it be walking? Would it be underground? I mean, that stuff was just amazing to me.
They wanted to have the logo the same every week, exactly the same, because they said to me, look, we can't advertise this. Each time you make a new logo, for me, the fun and the excitement of working in this medium is to experiment, to explore new ways of doing things.
Pelo seu contrato com a Quality Comics, Will Eisner se torna o primeiro cartunista a possuir os direitos sobre seu personagem.
I knew very early that the only way to have editorial freedom, editorial control, was to own the comic strip yourself, because if you owned it, you could control it. If, as in the case of Superman and Batman and the others, the artists who did them didn't own the property. It wasn't their property. It was like living in someone else's house. I knew I had a very strong poker chip in this deal, because they needed someone who could deliver the comic strip for them regularly every week. It was like television is today. They couldn't afford to be late. In the magazine business, you can be a day late or 2 days late. It's okay. But for a newspaper, you have to deliver promptly and on time. Anyway, we did negotiate a deal in which I permitted them to carry the copyright notice on the strip as they published it, but then if, under the contract, if we separated, if I left, then the property would remain mine.
Well, in those days, the publishers owned all the characters. Batman, Superman, those two happen to be owned by the same publishing house, DC Comics, or Detective Comics. And they literally wouldn't buy the material unless they owned the rights. That led to really the tragedy of Siegel and Schuster, for example, the creators of Superman. But when they first sold Superman, they sold the 10-page story for $120, and with that contract, the contract was written in the back of the check, which they did in those days. So if you wanted to cash the check, you had to sign the contract, which automatically gave the publishers the right.
A classic device in most moving picture stories and adventure stories is always to have the hero have some kind of sidekick, or somebody, either a father figure, as in the case of Commissioner Dolan, or a girlfriend that they never marry, which is like Ellen Dolan, and a sidekick, which I gave him as Ebony. Now, in the case of Ebony, I treated Ebony quite differently than blacks were treated before. Whilst Ebony was a stereotyped caricature, nonetheless, his conduct and his character was something that had not been done before.
I think, in fairness, one can only look at Ebony, first of all, in the context of the times. If you look at the role of blacks in movies and in radio and in early TV, stereotypes were just the fact of life. What Will did, to his credit, was he had a major supporting character who was heroic, who many times saved the spirit's life, and who was a very sympathetic character.
Oh, every little bug has a honey to hug but me. As you can see,
em pouco tempo, ficou claro que o Spirit era um personagem mais complexo do que o típico super-herói.
I regarded always the superhero as a very difficult and very unexciting subject to work with, because for me the superhero is a one-dimensional character. The function of a story, the underlying function of a story, in any story, is the possibility of failure or the possibility of mortality. Since superheroes have no mortality, for me there is no story.
What makes the Spirit special is the fact that he is a human. He's a man, and he has all the qualities that make a human being interesting.
Superheroes offer something very basic in comics, which is they lend themselves well to simple action. They lend themselves well to kind of streamlined stories with good clearly defined, evil clearly defined. The Spirit aspired somewhere else. What the Spirit did was aspired not to the cliches of comic books, but to the cliches of movies. And as a result, was aspiring toward a somewhat higher level of popular culture, because movies already, certainly the noir films that were surrounding Eisner, the films that came after Orson Welles' Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil, let's say, aspired to a slightly more complex notion of the way the universe was constructed, and tried to appeal to an older audience than the audience that the superhero comics were aimed at.
Mais il a pas du tout les valeurs du super-héros américain. C'est peut-être effectivement plutôt un personnage plus proche de la bande dessinée européenne, c'est vrai. C'est un peu l'anti-héros ou l'antithèse du super-héros plutôt.
Com a incrível produtividade de Eisner, entregando um episódio completo, escrito e desenhado por semana, o Spirit se tornou um tesouro, contendo dezenas ou mesmo centenas de boas histórias.
One called Sans Serif, which was kind of his version of a Warner Brothers movie, and another one about a Lorelei, a woman who lured truck drivers to their doom. When they were driving the truck, they would hear the siren song, and they would veer off the road. And the way he represented the song was with this very strange set of marks that looked a little bit like notes, but also like a kind of seismograph. Another story that I think is probably one of Will's favorites as well, about a little nebbish, a nobody who learns to fly and jumps off a building.